Welcome to episode one of the Bears Talk podcast, a podcast set in Ireland, talking about the Bears as it's in the name. And look, I'm delighted to be joined in episode one from CHGO, Greg Braggs. Greg, really appreciate you taking the time to be the first guest on the debut podcast and, giving me that little bit of a boost from the start.
Oh, no problem at all, man. I appreciate you having me on as always. You're a good man, and I'm excited to talk some Bears with you after a fun week down in Indianapolis.
Excellent, yeah, and obviously you mentioned Indianapolis. I mean, it's all go. We talked about initially the Super Bowl, and people think when the Super Bowl is over, that's it. Football season ends. That's certainly not when football season ends, especially for people like ourselves who cover it and yourself who goes to Indianapolis. It just feels like it's all go. You get the little pockets throughout the year where it feels like it slows down, but in general now, look, the NFL season just is constantly kind of churning along with stuff always to be done and always kind of popping up.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. The NFL does a good job of spreading everything out to a point where there really isn't an off season quite like any other sport. I mean, I think the only time throughout the 12-month calendar year where you can truly find a spot where there's an opening is in June. And there's even been some talks of how they want to spread out, training camp, where it's going to be a earlier invite for the younger players, and so they're even trying to open that up to where the players, I mean, forget media and fans, where the players don't even get a break from any of this. So the NFL knows how to keep the wheel turning. I mean, to try to schedule a vacation or schedule a knee surgery or schedule, whatever birthday party or whatever you want, it makes it, the NFL always makes it kind of tricky, but I guess we're lucky in that regard too, because if you're covering baseball or basketball or hockey, the off seasons can go pretty dark. And for us, there's always something to talk about and keep our interest. And I mean, when you're talking about fans that are passionate like we are, that makes it better than, when it, kind of slips off into the ether and you've got to kind of find some other kind of interest.
That's it. I find myself now, months and months in advance going to the wife, please look, the Super Bowl's on in a few months. Can we pencil that in now on free agency? And well, look, as you say, if you love football, I mean, and for us kind of covering it like this, that's what you want. That's what keeps you going. Actually, the Super Bowl, I will just quickly mention the Super Bowl because obviously for me, it was my first Super Bowl, and it gave me an opportunity to meet people who I've talked to like this for 2-3 years. And you were actually one of the people who I got to meet there and got to talk in person, which for me was great. As I say, I've watched you a lot on CHGO, and we've had a couple of interviews. So to be able to get to Radio Row, I met Mark as well. I think that's the third time I've met Mark. If he actually remembers who I am, he's probably going to think I'm stalking him. I did meet him in Dublin for the Northwestern game a few years ago. I met him in London when we were there for the Bears game, and then in New Orleans. But just how exciting is it for someone like yourself, as you say, big fan, doing what you do now, to be able to go to a Radio Row. And like for me, it was every time I turned around, it was there's Terrell Davis, there's Deion Sanders, there's, there's Greg Cosell. For you, how is that now? I mean, you've done a number of years now, but is it still the same for you when you go in there and you just see these people walking around who, Hall of Fame people in the NFL?
Yeah, it never gets old. That's for sure. I'm competitive, so I want to try to thrive in this industry and feel like I belong, and that's part of it. So you can't do too much of the deer in the headlights, on its surface, but underneath the water, it's like over the water, I'm like a duck, but underneath I'm going crazy because I'm excited. And, I think for me at this point, whoever I interview, or whoever I get to talk to or network with behind closed doors, it never gets old. Haven't quite had that. I think the one person, I think if I had the opportunity to interview a guy like Devin Hester, I think there's a good chance I probably just would cry through the entire interview for what he means to me as a fan and somebody that is a diehard Bears fan. So like those things still resonate with me. I'll never be so jaded in the industry where I like act like I'm above any of this. Like it's a thrill and an honor and to be able to do this stuff every day. Honestly, for me, the bigger thing, I'm not afraid to talk to anybody. I don't care who you are. Like it doesn't matter how I'll walk right up to Jerry Jones and shake his hand and act like I'm a somebody to him. Like I don't that part for me, even though I'm starstruck by seeing the person, I can still have the ability to walk up to them, shake their hand, and act like I'm like cool with them. I'm everybody's best friend. That's just who I am. I think the thing that for me is more humbling is when fans come up and talk about, how much they appreciate what I do, and or I'll have different people reach out and talk about the impact I've made on them. Like for me, that is something that's very humbling and gratifying. And like, you see over my shoulder the brags in the stands saying like, got a couple guys that I do a Purdue podcast with and trying to help them and elevate them. So like that's the bigger thing to me is like the impact I can make for other people, just like a guy like David Kaplan made an impact on me and at a time where I didn't know I was going to do anything. And then one day I did, and I owed it a lot to people like that helped me when they didn't have to. So, or inspired me when they may not have known that. So for now, to me, to feel like I might be able to do that for other people, I think that's probably the most gratifying thing and the thing that drives me the most.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to hear. And look, I'm sure, everybody really does appreciate and they do appreciate the help that can be given to them, because it is tough. There's so many appreciate it. But Greg, we obviously talked Super Bowl there, but you mentioned then the combine. Yourself and the guys from CHGO were up there in Indianapolis for the combine. How did that go? And are there any players that really stood out to you, as not even for the Bears specifically, but players who maybe didn't have an eye on that really impressed you and kind of stood out to you as a player that you're going to keep an eye on them now, whereas you may have not before?
Well, just like every offseason, I find a way to fall in love with a wide receiver, at least for some Bears fans that got mad because I wanted Rome Odunze over an offensive lineman last year. The wide receiver this year isn't in the first round regard, but somebody that made a huge impact on me talking with him was Xavier Restrepo from Miami. And this guy to me, like, is somebody that, I don't know, he just strikes me as somebody that's been through a lot in his life. He was born with like a facial, like I don't know how to explain it. Like he was born with, a facial feature that like, is like a muscle, problem, whatever you want to say. Like, and I just tried to put in his shoes, like what he had to go through as a kid, and then, he's from the Latin community as well. So like, there isn't many guys that come through that community and get to the NFL, and you saw some different media outlets talking to him about that. And so I just think about it. I enjoy a good underdog story, and it just feels like this guy has underdog written all over him. He led he has the most catches in the history of Miami University. Like there's been some great receivers, some great players that have come out of that college, and this is the guy that leads them all in catches. So he's got a great ability. I think you could just tell by talking to him, he's got a big heart, and plays and seems like a guy that would play with a lot of passion. He speaks with a lot of passion. So he really jumped off the board for me in a big way. So I think he was probably the number one person that stood out to me in that regard. Obviously, talking on Saturday to the offensive line, Will Campbell is as advertised. I know there's that one clip where that's gone around where he talks about leadership in the locker room, and that made some viralness or whatever. And he was the same way in person, talking to him at the podium. He's talking about, growing up on a farm and laying out all this pipe to, grow beans and stuff. Like this guy, me, blue collar, bricklaying background, to hear a guy talk about his farming days and having to lay out miles and miles of pipe, and working that on things that nobody really even knows as a job. I certainly can appreciate that kind of person that's cut from that kind of cloth. Obviously has a ton of ability as well. Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, same thing. Really enjoyed talking with him. It definitely feels like he'd love to play for the Bears from everything that I'm hearing. Tyler Booker, certainly, he had a nice side to him. He had a big old smile on his face at certain points, but then you could feel the nastiness that he wants to play with, the intent of that when he talked about, wanting to take the love of the game from some players and stuff. So, those guys certainly resonated with me in a big way. And then, I think the other interesting one was Mike Green, the defensive end from Marshall. He comes to the podium and he had an interesting story where he's got, accusations coming across him here in the last couple weeks that aren't pretty. And he also was accused of some certain things in high school as well that he's kind of had to stand up to. And I don't really know how that story is going to unfold. And so I'm not going to speak on whether or not you can believe him or not believe him, or, say he's guilty or innocent of anything. And maybe this is tough for him because, who knows if it had any validity to it at all. And now he's got to step to a combine podium and answer questions for 20 minutes, less about his game and more about, any kind of background, behavioral or, legally, which isn't easy. And so I thought he handled that well. Now, I guess the question is, if he didn't do anything that he was accused of, then I thought he handled it very maturely. And if he did do anything that he's been accused of, then obviously, that goes without saying, not any inch of anyone would want that kind of a person on their team. But then I guess the other thing you would say to the way he handled it at the podium, then he was coached really well to act that way. So I thought there was kind of a conundrum there, because I just, on its surface, watching this guy answer these questions, be direct, be upfront, not duck any of the questions or go sideways on it. I thought, I'm like, wow, he's handling this really well for something that's not an easy thing for someone his age with the amount of money that's on the line. But that being said, we don't know everything that's gone on behind the scenes. So you don't know whether it was handled maturely or he was coached well. Now, the last person I would say is the person I was most interested to hear from going into the combine was James Pierce, who's someone that has had some conversations about what kind of character he has as a teammate, nothing legally, obviously, but just what kind of a guy he is in the locker room, teammate, leader type, and so there was stuff that has been said about his character. And so I was curious to hear, him kind of show who he was. And we didn't really learn that much from him at the podium. He was very short with most of his answers. I think his talent speaks for itself if you watch the tape, but I was kind of like, I don't know what his people were telling him, but you would have liked to seen him go to the podium and maybe try to open up a little bit and try to dispel some of the things about him, that he's not this good guy behind the scenes and stuff. But I'm not going to say he did anything to show me he wasn't a good guy or anything like that. But it just also he felt very closed off, when he was speaking to the media. But this is our only chance as media to talk to these guys and try to get a feel for how they are as people. Whereas the teams get to really do extensive background checks, talk to them personally at length, talk to the people that have known them the longest. So we don't really get privy to that kind of information. So you get a 20-minute window with each of these guys to try to figure out the kind of person they are. And sometimes you learn a lot about a guy and you see what their heart is, like a Roma Dunze and different players like that in years past. And then other times you don't learn as much, and you try to be fair to that, because you get 20 minutes with a bunch of media guys throwing a bunch of questions at them. So that I don't think is fair to take and say, okay, definitively, these are who they are as people. They've got a lot of pressure on them standing at those podiums.
No, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we know they play in front of big crowds, and they are still kids, though. They are still young. It is still, and it's their whole future that's kind of being judged in front of their eyes by people they don't know. So yeah, you do have to take it all and kind of sift through it and be fair to these players. And obviously you mentioned potential issues that some players can have. I think the Bears are kind of feeling the aftermath of a similar kind of a situation now. And the Jalen Carter, Darnell Wright, now they've won the Super Bowl, people are suddenly starting to come up again. Oh well, should have just taken them. But it's never that straightforward. It's never that easy. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And for these teams as well, if there is any negativity there, I mean, these are multi-million-dollar contracts they are going to be handing out. So you do just have to trust that these teams have the employees that will do the work in the background, do the legwork, and they're going to make the right choices that they feel is best for the team. And you do hope, obviously, that players do get a fair shake, because none of us ever really know what has or has not gone on. But they're just the kind of the way it goes. But in terms of the combine and the players there, well, actually, we look at the draft now. When we look at the options the Bears have, we know there's a lot of lineman talk when it comes to the Bears. Not so much the tackles. I think we're fairly certain the tackles are going to be who they are going into the season. But we're looking at the interior. We're looking at center. We're looking at the two guards. I think a lot of people feel like maybe the Bears might go experience at center, because you don't want a rookie center with a still young Caleb Williams and maybe a rookie guard on one or either side. I mean, you mentioned the O-lineman there. Do you think the Bears will go O-line kind of high, or do you think there may be players there in the second or third round, and maybe, as with every year, free agency will dictate what actually does happen when it comes to the draft?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I'll tell you this much. The Bears need defensive line and offensive line. Well, they picked a good year to need those as their top needs, because this has been their top needs for a few years, and they just didn't address it. So I'm not going to act like it was overly calculated. These have been needs for the Bears for 5 years now. It just so happens this year is a great year for both of those needs. And luckily, it feels like those are really, when you talk about, well, the Bears aren't really looking for a quarterback or a wide receiver or tight end or corner or safety. I guess that's what I mean in terms of the timing of the roster versus what's available here in free agency and the draft. So they got a lot of really good options, and I'd be lying to say if I had really a strong feeling definitively either way, especially at number 10, what they're going to do without knowing how they attack free agency. That being said, you've got a few guys there, and I think Will Campbell is certainly one of them. Maybe Armand Menbo, as well, that could potentially be there at 10. Maybe Mason Graham falls to 10, talking to some people this week, especially after his measurables came in, and he came in about 25 pounds lighter than what he was listed as in college. I think that may potentially scare some teams off, and that might have make him drop a few spots. And then the Bears would have to make a decision at 10 if that's the route they want to go. So it's interesting to think about those things. And going into the draft or going into the combine, I was like, you can get Dahlman, you can get Trey Smith. There's a bunch of really good offensive linemen that are available in the second round. You've got 2 second-round picks. Let's just get a defensive lineman with that number 10 pick. And now the more I look at this, I don't know, maybe I'm starting to lean the other way now. Like, the offensive line has been such a problem for this team for so long, and maybe they should just go completely overhaul crazy, where you sign a center in free agency, you sign as Kevin Zeitler from Detroit as a plug and play for a year, you draft Will Campbell with the number 10 pick, you draft guys in the second round, both, like, just go insane with it, and give yourself an opportunity to not be denied that your offensive line is going to work because you left no stone unturned. And I'll say this much too. The one thing I will say about whoever they draft at 10, I'd really prefer it to be a guy that still has the ability. If you want to start him at guard, like Will Campbell, to me, everything's talking about his arm length. I want him to be a tackle. And I don't know how this would work with Braxton Jones here for this year. And if you've got to start Will Campbell at guard, but then potentially move him out to tackle if they don't re-sign Braxton. But I just like if they're going to draft a guy at 10 for that person to be someone that has the door open to be the starting left tackle for the Bears for the future, because that you're only going to get so many chances to pick in the top 10 going forward if things go right. So that's something that I was certainly looking at. If you can't do that and you're going to trade and you're going to have, a guard, then it would be really nice if the Bears could trade back. I'm not saying that it takes two to tango. You need a dance partner. But if you could trade back X amount of spots and come away with Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, and that's a guy that could be either your guard or center of the future, I'd really love that as well. So I don't know. The last couple of years you leave the combine, and I told anyone that would listen, because from the information gathering that I saw and the people I talked to in Indianapolis, I said they were going to trade with the Carolina Panthers. And not to toot my own horn, but a few days later, I was right, because you could feel it in Indianapolis. And then last year, the same thing. When we were there, even though it was already a foregone conclusion to most, but not all, because it was still a discussion topic between Fields versus Caleb, you knew when you were in Indy talking to people, they're getting rid of Fields and they're going to draft Caleb Williams. And if they can't get Caleb Williams, they're going to draft a quarterback, and it's not going to be Justin Fields as their quarterback next year. That was 100% definitive. This year, people are like, well, hey, Braggs, give us the predictions. The last couple of years you've had it. I just think there's so many variables that for everybody we talk to, certainly you're hearing information. There's people within the organization that love Tyler Booker, but there's nothing out there that's like they are 100% doing this to start free agency, 100% doing this for the draft. It's not like that it was the last couple of years. And I think that speaks to the fact that the Bears are starting to get to a point where they have some flexibility on how they want to approach things, because they don't have the dire have to take this quarterback right now, have to do this. Like they have some different things where they can, strategize a certain way, because the holes are starting to I don't want to jinx it, because the Bears still they're talking about a 5-win team, but at the same time, like, it does feel like they have less things they have to address immediately and can kind of start spreading their wings and trying to get creative with how they want to build their roster.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, I've kind of said that myself recently, is that I know we finished with 5 wins last year, and things certainly didn't go the way we'd all hoped. I think we got a little bit of ahead of ourselves as fans last summer, or, last offseason. But I still think the structure of a good team is there. And obviously the two most important areas outside that quarterback is, the trenches on both sides of the ball. And look, that is important. And I feel that will be addressed this year. Well, whether it fixes it or not, we'll find out. But I mean, I kind of feel like it is hard to get a grasp on where you really see the Bears going. It did feel a lot more definitive over the last number of years. I just have a feeling he's going to trade down. I don't know why. I haven't seen anything that makes me say that for a fact, obviously, but I just kind of feel that that's the way it's going to go. But I've seen a few people come to me and say they want Genty at 10. They want this dynamic running back, that Ben Johnson. They want him to kind of copy the Sonic and Knuckles from the Lions. I mean, any chance you think they could shock us and go with an explosive running back who has shown in college that he likes those 50+ yard runs to keep things going?
I mean, I won't take it off the table. But at the same time, if we had to logically list the priorities of what they should do at 10, it would be, O-line, D-line, take your pick, 1A, 1B, trade back being third priority, and then fourth. Then I guess that's when Ashton Genty comes in there at fourth. Like, to me, especially when it'd be one thing if there were no running backs in this draft, but you're talking about all these different. We talked to Cam Scadaboo out of Arizona State, really impressive young man, and he did really well in his testing and his broad jump and his 40 time, and we already know he's a bulldozer. He certainly fits the David Montgomery type of role that Ben Johnson had, if that's what they wanted to do in the second round, potentially. So, if there were no running backs in this draft, maybe then, you might look at the itchy trigger finger of Ben Johnson saying, I want to have my guy. I want to have my, not that him and Jahmyr Gibbs are the same player. They're not, but my playmaker at running back. Because we do, I think that, when they asked Ben Johnson, about DeAndre Swift on Tuesday, he was like, I look forward to working with him this year. So there wasn't any kind of like tell in that regard, like, oh, they're looking to get rid of him, so, and some fans were, well, what else is he supposed to say? Well, he doesn't have to say certain things. You're not going to, you're not, maybe not always going to have something said definitively, but you also don't have to give away anything either. So I thought his choice of words kind of said that DeAndre Swift is likely to be on the roster here this upcoming season. So anybody thinking, well, they got rid of him in Detroit, so they're going to get rid of him now here too, I don't think that's what's going to happen. So we'll see. But I doubt Ashton Genty. I'd be really surprised. I know I've heard that he's going to have a top 30 visit with the Bears. When you're talking about a guy that's, one of those running backs that you only see, how many running backs of his mold have come out in the last 10, 15 years, not many. So I think you're going to use one of your top 30 visits to talk to him. But at the same time, I just think they have so many needs in the trenches with a plethora of options on both sides of that ball that I don't think running back will be the move for the Bears.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there completely. I think he is a really good player, and I think in a different year, maybe he'd be an exciting player to bring in, but there are other areas that the Bears do need to strengthen. And you've said it, there are good running backs later on in the draft who can really come in and make a difference. So I think that's the way to go. I think they do take a running back, but I think that's later on, and you can definitely get good players there. We mentioned Ben Johnson, and I'm going to touch on obviously the coaching staff. It's been the big moves that have obviously happened for the Bears this offseason. Something to talk about. There's just one little kind of rumor I saw flying about before we came on, so I thought I'd put it to you. Khalil Mack returning to the Bears. I'm seeing stories saying that he's open to it. Obviously, he came here in 2018, and they started off in a house on fire. That defense, that Vic Fangio defense, was really, really flying. Then over time things happen. They put a lot of faith in the quarterback in Trubisky. Unfortunately, that doesn't work out, and Mack moves on. And any chance he comes back as a kind of a stopgap measure on that defensive line?
Yeah, I certainly think there's a chance. And Mack has some familiarity here in Chicago, so maybe it'd be an easier sell to him to come to a 5-win team here in Chicago. I think most teams can see the potential the Bears have. It's not like players are blind. They see how things went down last year, so they're not strictly looking at the win-loss total. But, Khalil, having played here, might pay closer attention to it than others. And then, he knows the facility, he knows the people, he knows the front office. So I think it'd be an easier transition for him. So I'd love for him to come back, but that's only because I love Khalil Mack just as a player and as a Bears fan. To see him come back here, I think would be a lot of fun. It certainly would depend on how much we're talking price wise, but I'd have no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be against that myself. Plus, I have 2 Mac jerseys upstairs, which could be busted back out again. So that would be nice. And obviously, I mentioned the coaching staff. They are it's the last one we get to, but it has been the talking point for the Bears this offseason. It has been the big moves. Obviously, Matt Eberflus is the first head coach to be fired in season after a debacle on Thanksgiving, and we have Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson seemed to be the in-demand, offensive coordinator. I do get worried when OCs come up, but there does feel something to me to be a little different about him. Obviously, he was the play caller. I've heard people compare him to Matt Nagy. They're very, very different. That was not Nagy's offense. Nagy, called a handful of plays toward the end of the season. We know Ben Johnson is the architect of that offense, and everything went through him. How excited are you to have Ben Johnson as the Bears head coach? Is this the way you wanted him to go? And are you happy now that this is where the Bears have landed?
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think just like Caleb Williams, I think there's a floor with Caleb Williams. Like, I think last year you kind of saw what that floor is. Quarterback that took a lot of sacks, but can still make plays. He can still move the ball downfield, still has a lot of talent. We saw that with Jay Cutler, right? Same thing. Like, he's a great quarterback. He had his limitations, but he could still get the job done because of that God-given talent that he had. So I think in the same regard, when you talk about Ben Johnson, do we know how he is as a head coach? Do we know what he can do as a 53-man roster or leading the whole team and certainly try to turn around a culture that I think was broken halfway through the year after that Hail Mary? No, we don't know those answers. But what we do know is that he can call plays, that he can elevate your quarterback to a different level by scheming guys open, setting up guys to make easy reads, get your run game going downhill. Everybody across the league talks about he's one of the, if not the best play caller in football, one of the best play designers in football, a mad scientist, if you will. And so that much I know he'll be able to do. I know he'll be able to call an offense, get things to where the offense can get going a little quicker, get into rhythm, and then it'll come down to the players to do the rest of it. Like, to me, I think his playbook is going to be sound and innovative, and his run game will, have a certain standard, and they're clearly going to upgrade the offensive line. So I don't think we're going to have to see what we've had to deal with the last few years in terms of lack of talent depth on the offensive line. So those other things are still left to be determined. But I think from that standpoint, I think he'll have a floor of, okay, he can at least do this. Can he do the rest? Like, look at a Mike McDaniel, right? Is he a perfect head coach? No. But he knows how to call plays, right? He knows how to make Tua look pretty damn good down there. Tua's, got his own talent, not trying to take everything away from him. But, Mike McDaniel knows how to get the job done off it. Is he this great head coach? No. But, he's good enough. And I'm not saying that's I'm not settling for that with Ben Johnson. I'm simply saying that there's certain guys in the league that have a good enough offensive mind that they can get the job done. Now, can he become one of the best head coaches in the league if he can check the rest of those boxes by being a great motivator, by holding the team accountable, by being not just dialed into the offense, but the entire 53? Yeah. But he's got a floor of, I can at least get this part of our football team going in that box check.
Absolutely. And just to kind of look at the guys he surrounded himself with, obviously when we look at offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle was a young guy who's brought in, who obviously we know won't be calling the plays. This, as we've talked about there, is Ben Johnson's offense. But, we've Declan Doyle there as the offensive coordinator. And obviously a big move at defensive coordinator is Dennis Allen. So we know that, Dennis Allen is that kind of experienced former head coach who will be able to take that defense and be that head coach for the defense, which will leave Ben Johnson, the time really to concentrate on the offense. And then we look at Antoine Randall has come in. Eric Bieniemy is an interesting one, has come in as the run game or the running backs coach, who, for a lot of years he's been talked about as a head coach. It never really materialized, and then he ended up with the Commanders, but still obviously a really knowledgeable, good football guy. So when you look at what Ben Johnson has surrounded himself with, how encouraged are you, or what do you think of, the team he's kind of put in place there now?
I'm ecstatic about the coaching staff. Ecstatic. That to me is, I think, the thing I feel strongest about. I think the players have a lot to prove going into next year. I think the head coach still has a lot to prove, to be worth the amount of money they paid for him and to live up to the hype of being this, Kyle Shanahan type dude that's just come in here to try to save us. But this coaching staff, I am ecstatic for, and I feel as confident about them as anything this team's got going on. And they certainly still have things to prove. But when, like you said, you listed it off, Eric Bieniemy, every single person down the line that's worked with this guy talks about how he is a top line coach. He's a guy that helped mentor and mold a guy like Adrian Peterson in Minnesota. Obviously Adrian has unbelievable talent, so I'm sure it's a lot of fun to coach a guy like that. But at the same time, like, he has been somebody every step of the way. And then certainly in Kansas City, made a huge impact on the players that played there. We talked to Kyle Long about him. Kyle could not speak more highly of him. Kyle is not a guy that blows smoke. So I'm excited for Eric Bieniemy. Antoine Randall, same thing. Look at what he did with the wide receivers in Detroit. He comes back home to Chicago. Anybody that's from our area knows how much of an impact Antoine Randall had to the community in high school in the 90s, taking down a guy like Kevin Garnett. This guy's been a winner at every step of his life. He's beaten Kevin Garnett in the playoffs in high school basketball. He gets drafted by the Chicago Cubs. He goes to IU, Indiana University, and he's basically Michael Vick in his time there. For anybody that paid attention to what he was doing there, elevated that program when they were nothing. And then he gets to the NFL. He goes from being a quarterback to a wide receiver, has a fantastic career where he wins a Super Bowl. He throws a touchdown in the Super Bowl. And then, oh, by the way, now he becomes a coach, and his reputation has been so highly recommended by the players underneath him. You talk to some different guys that, Amon-Ra St. Brown, upset that he's gone. Now he's the assistant head coach here in Chicago. That's a hell of a journey for Antoine Randall. Al Harris coming from Dallas, a guy that, probably should have got defensive coordinator consideration and even head coach consideration in Dallas. If we're being honest, for everything we've heard down there, they didn't want to take a chance on him, but yet they're going to take a chance on Brian Schottenheimer. Okay, cool. I'm glad to have him in our house. And we're talking about a guy. He's not even our defensive coordinator here. He's just a guy that's come in as somebody that's going to help the DB room. Then, like you said, Dennis Allen, anybody that's down in New Orleans, talking to some people while we were down there in the Super Bowl, wasn't maybe the best fit for a head coach, but a hell of a defensive coordinator. And the numbers have spoken for themselves throughout time when he was in New Orleans as the D coordinator. So you look across the board from a resume and have already proven it. Dan Rorschach, same thing. If you look at some of the O-line guys that he's molded underneath him, the defensive line coach they brought in, same thing. He's got decades of experience under his belt. So I think from an experience standpoint, I think they check all the boxes. And then I also think from leadership, motivational, a teaching type boxes to check. I think they check those as well, because this team lacks leadership. These players need good leaders in this locker room. And I think Ben Johnson has that capability, but I think the assistant coaches are going to be integral in this regard, because you've got Al Harris and Antoine Randall who have been there and done that as players that can talk to them. JT Barrett, same thing, that have been in their shoes, that have been through the ups and downs and the highs and lows of being a player. Now they're coaches, have had success, and can show these guys, hey, this is how you can get it done to be successful. And these players can now trust them, because the players last year did not trust the coaching staff. So I think they're going to have some trust there. I think there's going to be a leadership effect that certainly I think could potentially create a trickle-down effect where those guys, Eric Bieniemy being this tough coach, we needed so much tough coaching on this team last year. It's not even funny. Let that trickle down into the locker room where guys can start holding each other accountable as well. So I am really excited for the culture that these guys could potentially build as a coaching staff. And so I feel really good about the assistant coaches that he brought in.
Yeah, no, I'm right there. Which, I mean, I can't believe I forgot Al Harris. I mean, when you look at what the stats for those Dallas DBs since he was there, it's phenomenal. And leadership for me, I mean, there's so many facets to it, but as you say, leadership for me is huge. Without kind of going through everything, but we look at the Tyreek Stevenson incident last year. That's lack of leadership with coaches, that a player is willing to kind of go and do that. And then there was the whole issue after it. Even a couple of seasons ago with the Chase Claypool, when that move was starting to disintegrate, I didn't like how Eberflus handled it. I felt he looked out of his depth, and that was a big reason why I wanted him gone last year, because they didn't have leadership. They had good players, but they needed coaches to really get a grip of them and to work with them. And I just felt that Eberflus wasn't the guy. Nice guy, great guy, can live next door and talk to him every day. I don't want to manage him or head coach my football team. I think they need stronger than that. And like you, I love what they've done. I love the mix that's in there, the experience. And I'm really excited to see where this goes. And Greg, really, really appreciate you being number one guest to come onto the show. Hopefully, I'll have you back on again sometime. But if you just want to let the guys know where they can find you, anything you've got coming up that they should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you having me on. Best of luck with this going forward. And, just keep working hard and having fun with it. That's what this is all about. But yeah, you guys can all follow me on Twitter. And that's where I talk most of my nonsense at G Braggs Jr. 23. And then obviously follow CHGO Bears on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, CHGO Bears or CHGO Sports. You can find us there doing shows 5 days a week. And then during the season, obviously pre and post game show and everything in between. So we'll be having a ton of coverage for free agency. I'd be waiting around on pins and needles all week because you never know if any news can drop even before free agency starts a week from today as we record this here on a Monday. I think on a week from now is when free agency starts, but I think the bullets will be flying even before that for some big news dropping, maybe not just with the Bears, but around the NFL. So we'll be covering all that and obviously getting everybody set for the draft. So appreciate you having me on today, as always.
No, absolutely. And look, I'm sure anybody who's found a way to watching this is well aware who you guys are and are probably watching anyway. But just in case someone has slipped through the cracks, absolutely check out the guys at CHGO. It's obviously, I'm a big fan. I watch all the time. It's phenomenal. And to everyone who has watched this or listened to this, do appreciate it. Please do come back. I'll have a lot more going forward. Until next time, take care.